I know it looks different, but this is a fully fledged audio interface, all with touch controls, built-in audio processing, including a limiter. Let's take a closer look at it. Hey, Julian Kraus here, and with me I got the Lewitt CONNECT 2, which we're going to check out in this video. Full disclosure, I bought this interface with my own money. This video is not sponsored in any shape or form. Let's have a look at the controls first, because the CONNECT 2 goes a completely different way than most interfaces. Later we're also checking out the sound quality and of course have a look at the software. The CONNECT 2 has an interesting shape which allows easy access to all the touch controls. With these you can control the gain for your inputs as well as the volume or other functions, which I will cover in a second. I think the touch controls are either you love them or you hate them kind of deal. I have to confess I was fully prepared to hate them, but to my surprise the touch controls are implemented pretty well. Especially the buttons are really responsive, and that makes it super easy to select the function that you need. But I'm less happy with the round volume bar for volume and gain control. Here it just didn't really feel intuitive for me to slide my finger around on the rubbery surface, and I had the feeling that I wasn't as precise as I sometimes wanted to be. Especially for volume control I was sometimes struggling a bit to find the right setting, and the volume was jumping a bit up and down. That said, the control has really been improved significantly since the initial release, where it felt really jumpy and unresponsive. Now I think it's very usable, but to be honest I would have still preferred a dial in the middle like the one you can find on the CONNECT 6. This would have also avoided me hitting the auto gain button in the middle of the touch circle accidentally a couple of times. I wish Lewitt would give me the option to disable the button in the middle in the software, as it is way too easy to accidentally hit it when you're reaching for the volume control. Check the pinned comments and follow me on Twitter, links in the description, as I will keep you posted if an update becomes available. Also, while you're down there, hit that like and subscribe button. Back to the CONNECT 2, you can see that you get quite a few controls, and these are also fully illuminated. This way you can easily see what you have currently selected or if you have muted something. Speaking about the mute, I have to say I really like the inclusion of an easily reachable mute button, and I think this is pretty much mandatory on all interfaces for live streaming for me. It's always a good idea to be able to mute yourself quickly, just in case something happens. The other buttons are pretty much self-explanatory. With them you can select your main out or headphones to set your volume, or select one of your inputs to set the gain. In my testing I noticed that the gain setting can sometimes be a bit jumpy and you can hear crackling while adjusting the gain. As you don't likely often adjust the gain mid-take, this isn't the biggest issue, but still something that you should be aware of. Luckily the volume control is pretty smooth and crackling free. You got two more buttons, one lets you control the monitor mix and another one which can be customized with some options that you can find in the software, and I will also show you a few of them later. On the backside you can find one XLR with a corresponding phantom power control and a separate instrument input. You also get two balanced outputs in the form of 1/4" TRS connections and two headphone outputs, one 1/4" and one 3.5mm. Both headphone outputs can be used simultaneously, but they share the same volume control. Generally speaking, I quite like the build quality, and because of the low profile, the interface sits firmly on the desk. And if you have the interface in your hand, it has a good amount of heft to it. That's mostly because of the bottom plate, which is steel and also smartly used as an RF shield. As always, I took a look inside the interface, but this time I didn't get as far, as I think the screws to fully take it apart are under the decorative top cover, which seems to be glued in place, and I didn't want to damage the interface just to take it apart. But that doesn't matter, because we only care about what comes out of the interface or what is recorded. So let's have a quick look at some measurements of the audio quality. The frequency response of the mic input is exceptionally flat in the audible range, which means all frequencies are recorded equally well. And the nice part is that the response stays like this even at the maximum gain setting, which is not always guaranteed. You can also change the frequency response with the software presets, but I will show you that later when we have a look at the software. Besides that, the distortions sit below -80 decibels, which in my opinion is inaudible. No further comment, this is obviously quite good. The dynamic range is the ratio of the strongest signal that the interface can capture to its noise floor, and you want this to be as high as possible to leave yourself some headroom while recording without introducing additional noise. In this aspect, the CONNECT 2 scores really well with 118 dBA. This is excellent, and even though the noise floor changes slightly depending on where you have set your gain at, but this should be sufficient for the most dynamic recording situations. With that, let's talk about preamp noise. This is of course important when you use dynamic mics, because these mics lead a lot of gain, and this accentuates the preamp noise. As a test, you can now hear me speaking into a Shure SM7B, which is a very low sensitive mic and a worst case scenario for pretty much any preamp. Here's how the noise floor sounds like. That's pretty good, not the best performer that I've ever tested, but it's far from the worst. With an EIN of around -127 dBOA, you can get low noise results without the need of an additional mic preamp like a fat lifter. Technically speaking, you can eke out 1 or 2 more dB with an ultra low noise preamp, but it's not a night and day difference and likely not needed in many scenarios. The Connect 2 also has enough gain on its own to amplify dynamic mics. Very nice. Let's jump to the output side, and here the Connect 2 also does not disappoint. Frequency response wise, we can see a perfectly flat line across the chart, as we would expect. FYI, the main output has a high volume mode in the settings, which I recommend to turn on to get the best signal to noise ratio possible, especially when you use balanced connections. Only if your speakers are overdriven or way too loud with the high volume mode enabled, then you should turn it off. If it were for me, I would make the high volume mode enabled the default. The dynamic range is nothing to write home about. 106 dBA is easily outperformed by older interfaces. That said, it's arguably already more than you need for audio reproduction, and so there's little chance that you will hear any noise from the output, so don't worry about it. Because of the dynamic range, I cannot say that the output is completely transparent, but I have to say that under real-world conditions, the audio quality is still very great. Okay, headphone output quality. Here's the complete overview, and I'm not going to go through all of that. But as you can see, the Connect 2 is nearly completely green. The frequency response is nice and flat, and it stays flat with pretty much any headphone because of the low output impedance. That's always great to see. The power output is sufficient to drive most headphones to loud levels, although it could have been a bit more, as you lose about 6 dB when you turn the direct monitoring dial to the middle. One thing to highlight is that the power output is impacted by the high impedance mode in the settings. I think the naming is a bit misleading, as this does not change anything about the impedance, but rather affects the output power and noise. With it turned on, you will have more power available, but you will also have a higher noise floor. And with the high impedance mode turned off, you get less power and also a decreased noise. While I have to say that for over-ear headphones, this amount of noise should not be audible, it is still a bit too high for sensitive IEMs, even with the high impedance mode turned off. So if you're planning to use sensitive IEMs with the Connect 2, you might hear a slight constant hiss. Not so great. Again, for over-ear headphones, this shouldn't really be an issue, and I think the audio quality for the headphone output is great. Nothing more to add. Alright, let's check out the software together. But upfront I can already tell you that I will not show you every single setting there is, because there are simply quite a lot. But here's a quick overview. On the left side you can see all the controls for your two inputs. You can control the gain, toggle phantom power, and enable a high-pass filter. But what's really cool is that you have essentially a limiter in the form of clip guard, and that makes it so that the input is nearly impossible to clip. So when I get a little louder, it's all good. Then you also have a few presets in the software: clean, warm, and vivid. These are essentially EQ adjustments, and they look like this. I think these simple shelf filters are much more useful than complex EQ filters that might be great in a particular situation but won't fit on many others. Besides these options, you can also activate a compressor. You can see what the compressor does with the signal, and it has an attack time of around 15 milliseconds and 150 milliseconds release with a ratio of about 3:1. Only downside I see is that the values like threshold and ratio are fixed, so you have to live with what's implemented, but I have to say these values are chosen pretty well, so it is actually usable in a broad range of situations. One more functionality you have is the denoiser, although the name is a bit confusing because it's not a denoiser in the classical sense, but rather a gate, which simply turns down the audio when you're not talking into the microphone. This is slightly less useful than a real denoiser, but it can already make a noticeable difference in some situations, so it's pretty nice to have. On the output side you can see the levels for the loopback channel, your main outs and headphones. And of course you can also control the volume here. On the very right you have some more controls, which lets you dial in the amount of direct monitoring and computer audio playback that you hear. You also have a mono and dim control. Quickly jumping into the settings, you can of course select your sample rate and buffer size, and here you have quite a few more options on the audio side of things. Even the LEDs can be customized, you can change the colors and also the brightness, which is really cool. And lastly, you have a few more options on what you want the customizable button on the interface to do. Before I wrap up this video, here are a few round trip times I measured with different buffer sizes and sample rates. And I have to say I was a bit surprised because they are nearly double of what I've measured with other interfaces so far. About 9 milliseconds with the fastest setting is likely still tolerable in practice, but comparatively speaking this is not a great showing. I hope that Lewitt can tweak this a bit more with a firmware update. Alright, verdict time, and let's start with the pros and cons. On the plus side, the Connect 2 gives you real-time audio processing built into the interface, which not a lot of interfaces do. This can be especially helpful in live streaming situations. You get things like EQ presets, compression, a limiter, and even a noise cancellation, although the latter one is just a simple gate. Generally speaking, the interface has a good audio quality and the preamp noise is also decently low. There is also an auto gain feature which can help you get set up quickly. I have one point that could be a pro or a con depending on how you feel about it, and that's of course the touch controls. Some will love them, some will hate them. As mentioned, I really quite like the touch buttons. They are really responsive, but I'm not the biggest fan of the circular volume slider thingy. Here I would have much rather preferred a finer control with a solid knob like the one from the Connect 6. For downsides, I see that you don't have any fancy routing options, so you can't have a different mix for your headphones and your speakers. You also can only record the processed or the unprocessed audio, but not both at the same time. There is some crackling when adjusting the input gain. The round-trip latency isn't the best, and lastly the noise of the headphone amp is a bit too high for use with IEMs. Again, for over-ear headphones, it's fine. With all the features that the Connect 2 provides, it seems like an interface aimed more towards streamers. I mean, musicians can also benefit from the options too, but I think in a streaming setup, this is where this interface really shines. I like that Lewitt is pushing the boundaries here with a new form factor and controls. And I have to confess that the flat design makes it super easy to reach all the controls. Yeah, if you're searching for an interface with the aforementioned features, you are good with a single mic input and you enjoy touch controls, the Connect 2 is an interesting option. That's it for now. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.